going to simplify and use only positive exponents in the answer. So since these dots here mean multiply, so since everything is multiplied, I'm just going to make a fraction. The reason I make a fraction is because I have negative exponents. So anytime you have negative exponents, you always want a fraction. So I'm just going to write them down one at a time. If it's got a negative fraction, negative exponent, it moves, or it stays. Let me restate that, I'm sorry. If it's got a negative exponent, it does move. Everything else stays. So the 4 doesn't have an exponent at all, so I'm going to leave it where it is. See how this y has a negative exponent? I'm going to put it on the bottom and take the negative sign away. The next term is 8, so I'm going to do the 8. The y has a positive exponent, so it stays up top. The x has a negative exponent, so it moves to the bottom. The u has a negative exponent, so it moves to the bottom. This u doesn't have an exponent, so this u stays up top. And that exponent there is 1. Okay, that's that term. The next term, this 3, I'm going to squeeze it out front because I like to have my numbers totally out front. And then x cubed, that's a positive exponent, so it's going to stay in the top. Figuring out the numerical portion first. 3 times 4 times 8, that's 12 times 8, which is 96. Okay, for the y's, you've got to see where your biggest exponent is. I have a 5 and a 9. So for my y's, the biggest exponent is on the bottom, so my y is going to be on the bottom. Then I'm going to subtract the exponents. 9 take away 5 is 4. Now I'm going to do the u's. I'm just going to go with what's in the numerator. For my u's, I have a 1 and a 4. The biggest exponent's on the bottom, so my u is going to be on the bottom. Subtract 4, take away 1 is 3. For the x's, I've got a 3 and a 2. The biggest exponent for the x is on the top, so my x is going to be on the top, and subtract the exponents for the x. 3 take away 2 is just 1. But if an exponent is 1, you don't write it down because it just means 1x. So that's the answer, the final answer. So again, I noticed there are negative exponents, so I'm making a fraction bar. The 6 doesn't have an exponent, so it stays up top. The x has a negative exponent, so it's going to go to the bottom. Take the negative sign away. I cross these off as I go so I make sure I get them all. Okay, so I have a 2. My w has a positive exponent, so I'm going to leave it up top. I'm leaving some space for the other numbers in the problem. My x doesn't have an exponent, it stays up top, but that exponent technically is a 1. Okay, that one's finished. Then I have a 4. This is why I left space. And the u has a negative exponent, so I'm going to move it to the bottom. Take the the negative away, so u cubed. Then u to the negative 2. That's also a negative exponent, so it's also going to go to the bottom. W to the negative 2, that's a negative exponent, so it's going to go to the bottom. So that took care of all of those. Okay, let's figure out the numerical portion and then we'll do the variables. 6 times 2 is 12. 12 times 4 is 48. For the w's, if the exponent is the same, they cancel each other out because 2 take away 2 is 0. So I'm going to have 0 w's in my answer. For my x, the biggest exponent's on the bottom, so my x will be on the bottom. 7 take away 1 is 6. Now for the u's, they're both on the bottom, so I'm just going to total up how many of u's I have in the denominator. So 3 here, 2 here, that's a total of 5. So that is the final answer on that one. Okay, the next one. The 3. U to the 4th is a positive exponent. It stays where it's at, leaves some space. V to the 4th, also positive exponent. Y cubed stays where it's at. That takes care of that one. Then I have a 6. The u stays where it's at, stays up top, but it's got an exponent of 1. Y to the negative 2, negative exponent has to go to the bottom. You take the negative sign away, so y squared. And then I have a 2. V to the negative 7 is a negative exponent, so the v to the 7th goes on the bottom. The numerical portion is 3 times 6 times 2. That's equal to 36. For my u's, I've got 4 on the top and then another one on the top, so that's a total of 5 u's on the top, nothing on the bottom. For my v's, I've got a 4 on the top and a 7 on the bottom. The 7's largest, it's on the bottom, so your v is going to be on the bottom. Subtract. 7 take away 4 is 3. For my y's, I have a 3 on the top, 2 on the bottom. 3 is the largest number, it's on the top. That means your y stays on the top. And for my exponents with my y, 3 take away 2 is 1, so I just have 1 y.